The sunset cast an orange glow across the waves as the private jet descended toward the island. I glanced over at Lucy, my wife of 12 years, who was practically bouncing in her seat with excitement. Her blonde hair caught the sunlight streaming through the plane window, and she flashed me a smile that once would have melted every worry away. But something about this trip already felt off. When our firm's CEO, Jack Edwards, announced the weekend getaway to celebrate a lucrative client, I'd reluctantly agreed. William Fellows, the client in question, was a name I knew only in passing, a wealthy, enigmatic investor who had been working closely with Lucy's team for months. Jack framed the trip as critical for cementing William's partnership, a reward for our hard work. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't going to be the carefree retreat we were promised. The island was breathtaking. As we stepped off the jet, we were greeted by pristine beaches, swaying palms, and staff dressed in crisp uniforms ready to cater to our every need. William stood at the edge of the tarmac, his tailored suit unbothered by the tropical breeze. He was every bit as charming as Lucy had described, with salt and pepper hair and a smile that could convince anyone to open their wallets, or their hearts. "Welcome," he said, shaking my hand firmly before turning to Lucy. His face lit up as if seeing an old friend. "Lucy, it's wonderful to have you here." I caught the glint in his eye as he greeted her. It wasn't a look one reserves for colleagues or acquaintances. Lucy's laugh came a little too easily as she thanked him, and my unease deepened. The rest of the day unfolded like a glossy travel brochure. Luxurious villas awaited us, each with sweeping ocean views. Lunch was served on a veranda overlooking the bay, where William charmed us with stories about the island's history. The group, Jack, his wife Margaret, and two other couples from the firm, seemed equally enchanted by our host's charisma. Lucy was glowing, her laughter ringing louder than usual as she sipped champagne and leaned into the conversation. I tried to push down the knot forming in my stomach. Lucy's enthusiasm was contagious, and I didn't want to ruin the trip with baseless jealousy. But as the day wore on, William's attention to her became harder to ignore. He addressed her with a familiarity that grated on me, and every time he spoke, she responded with the kind of warmth I hadn't seen in years. By dinner, I was determined to stay glued to her side. She had chosen a red satin dress for the evening, the kind she used to wear on our anniversary dates. Her hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders, and I couldn't deny she looked stunning. Yet, even as she walked into the dining room on my arm, it felt like I was already in second place. William led the evening like a conductor, orchestrating conversations and ensuring glasses stayed full. I found myself locked in small talk with one of the other directors, my attention divided as I watched Lucy across the table. She was animated, her face lighting up as William leaned close to her, whispering something that made her laugh. It was during dessert that he made his first move. "Mark," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Could I borrow you and Lucy for a moment? There's something I'd like to discuss." We followed him to his office, a space that reeked of understated opulence. Mahogany bookshelves lined the walls, and a high-backed leather chair dominated the room. William gestured for us to sit on the couch opposite his desk. Lucy perched on the edge, her legs crossed, while I sank back, wary of what was coming. William took his time, pouring himself a glass of whiskey before speaking. "Mark, let me get straight to the point. I've had the pleasure of working with Lucy for a few months now, and she's extraordinary." My jaw tightened, but I forced a polite nod. "She is. She's intelligent, charming, and driven, qualities I greatly admire. Which brings me to why I've asked you both here." He paused, his eyes locking onto mine. "I'd like to propose something unconventional. For the remainder of this weekend, I'd like to spend time alone with Lucy. And in exchange, I'm willing to deposit $100,000 into your account." The air in the room turned electric. I stared at him, my mind scrambling to process the audacity of what he'd just said. Lucy gasped softly beside me, but she didn't immediately reject him. That hesitation was a dagger to my gut. You think we're for sale? I asked, my voice low and dangerous. It's not about that, William said smoothly. It's about appreciation. This isn't a transaction, it's an arrangement. One I believe would be mutually beneficial. I shot up from the couch, my fists clenched at my sides. You're insane. Come on, Lucy, we're leaving. She didn't move. Her eyes darted between me and William, and I saw something in her expression that made my stomach turn. Was she, considering it? Mark, wait, she started, but I was already out the door. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of anger and disbelief. I stormed down the beach, the soft sand muffling my footsteps as the waves crashed against the shore. Questions swirled in my head. Why hadn't Lucy immediately refused? Had I misjudged her loyalty, her character? When I finally returned to our villa, Lucy was waiting for me. She had changed out of the red dress and into a simple sundress, her face pale but composed. Mark, she began, her voice trembling. I didn't know he was going to say that. But you didn't say no, I snapped, cutting her off. Why? Why didn't you shut him down the moment he opened his mouth? It caught me off guard, she said. I was shocked. Shocked, but not offended. I countered, my voice rising. You hesitated, Lucy. Do you even understand how that makes me feel? Tears welled in her eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. My trust in her had been shaken, and I wasn't sure it could be repaired. I love you, Mark, she whispered. You have to believe me. But as I stared at her, all I could think about was the way she had laughed at William's jokes, the way she had looked at him. I turned away, my heart heavy with doubt. And that night, for the first time in years, I slept on the couch. The morning arrived with an oppressive silence between us. Lucy was still in bed when I left the villa, unable to bear the tension or the questions spinning in my head. The ocean stretched endlessly before me as I walked along the beach, trying to reconcile the woman I married with the one who had hesitated last night. This island, meant to be a paradise, now felt like a gilded prison. I couldn't ignore the magnetic pull between William and Lucy, nor the insidious thought that perhaps their connection wasn't as new as I'd believed. By the time I returned to the villa, Lucy was up, seated on the balcony with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. She looked up as I approached, her expression carefully neutral. Mark, she began, we need to talk. I sat opposite her, crossing my arms. Fine. Talk. I didn't say anything last night because I was shocked, she said, her words slow and deliberate. I've never been in a situation like that before. I didn't know how to react. You didn't say no, I pointed out, the bitterness seeping into my voice. That's what you didn't do. Do you really think I'd consider his offer, she asked, her voice rising slightly. That I'd, what? Sell myself for money? I don't know, Lucy, I said, leaning forward. But what I do know is that you didn't reject him. And last night, I couldn't help but notice how comfortable you seemed around him. So, you tell me, am I wrong to feel like there's more going on here? Her face crumpled for a moment before she steeled herself. William is a client, Mark. A very important one. Of course I'm friendly with him, it's part of my job. Friendly doesn't cover it, I said, standing abruptly. You're different around him. Like you're trying to impress him. That's not fair, she said, her voice trembling. You're making this into something it's not. Am I? I asked, glaring down at her. Because from where I'm standing, it feels like I'm the only one who doesn't know the full story. She didn't respond, her silence cutting deeper than any words could. By mid-afternoon, I needed space. Jack had arranged a snorkeling excursion for the group, but I declined, letting Lucy go without me. As I watched her leave with the others, I felt a pang of regret. We had come here as a couple, yet now we felt like strangers. Instead, I wandered the island, hoping the solitude would help clear my head. It was during this aimless trek that I spotted William, alone on the veranda of his villa, sipping what appeared to be whiskey despite the early hour. The sight of him filled me with a surge of anger I couldn't suppress. "Mark," he called out as I approached, his smile as infuriatingly calm as ever. "Care to join me?" "I'm not here to drink," I said flatly. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Then sit. Let's talk." Reluctantly, I sat, keeping my hands clenched to keep from punching that smug expression off his face. "You've got a lot of nerve," I said, my voice low but sharp. "Proposing what you did last night." William swirled the amber liquid in his glass, unfazed. "I take it you're upset." "Upset doesn't begin to cover it," I snapped. "You disrespected me. You disrespected Lucy." "I disagree," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I made an offer, not an insult. I value Lucy, her intelligence, her charm. I thought I was being honest about my intentions." "Honest?" I scoffed. "You thought it was honest to treat my wife like a commodity?" He shrugged, taking a sip of his drink. "You're looking at this the wrong way, Mark. It's not about money or possession. It's about recognizing something extraordinary. Lucy is extraordinary." I stood, my anger boiling over. "Stay the hell away from her," I said, my voice hard. "I mean it." William didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled faintly. "You have my word, Mark. But if you're so concerned, maybe you should ask yourself why." I walked away, his words echoing in my mind like a taunt. Why, indeed? Was it insecurity, or was there something deeper at play, something I hadn't yet unearthed? By the time the group returned from snorkeling, I had resolved to get answers. Lucy seemed tired, her laughter subdued as she exchanged pleasantries with the others. When she spotted me waiting on the veranda of our villa, her steps faltered, but she quickly recovered, pasting on a smile. "Hey," she said as she approached, her voice light. "You missed a great day out." "I bet," I said, my tone making it clear I wasn't in the mood for small talk. "We need to talk. Now." Her smile faded. "Mark, can we not do this tonight? I'm exhausted." "We're doing this now," I insisted, stepping aside to let her into the villa. "No more excuses, Lucy. I want the truth." She sighed, setting down her bag before turning to face me. "The truth about what?" "About you and William," I said, crossing my arms. "Because I'm not buying the whole innocent work relationship act anymore." Her eyes flashed with anger. "There is no me and William," she said firmly. "I don't know what you're accusing me of, but it's not fair." "Then explain why he feels comfortable enough to proposition you," I said, my voice rising. "Explain why he looks at you the way he does." "Because I've seen it, Lucy. And I'm not the only one." She hesitated, her eyes darting to the floor. For a moment, I thought she might finally tell me the truth. But instead, she straightened, her expression defiant. "I can't control how William acts," she said. "And I'm not going to apologize for doing my job well." Her deflection only fueled my frustration. "This isn't about your job, Lucy," I said, my voice raw. "It's about trust. And right now, I don't know if I can trust you." Her face crumpled, but I didn't have the energy to comfort her. I turned and walked to the balcony, staring out at the horizon as the weight of our unraveling marriage pressed down on me. In the distance, the sun dipped below the ocean, casting the island in shadows. I had come here hoping for a brief escape from reality, but instead, I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew. The next morning, the weight of the confrontation lingered like a heavy fog in the villa. Lucy was already awake, seated on the edge of the bed with her phone in her hands. Her usual morning cheerfulness was absent, replaced by a quiet tension that neither of us wanted to acknowledge. Are you going to say anything? I finally asked, leaning against the doorway. She looked up, startled, as if she hadn't noticed me standing there. What do you want me to say, Mark? That I'm sorry. That I didn't see this coming. That would be a good start, I said, crossing my arms. But what I really want is the truth. Lucy sighed, setting her phone aside. I've told you the truth. There's nothing going on between William and me. Then why does it feel like I'm the only one trying to hold us together? I snapped. Because right now, it seems like you're more invested in impressing him than saving this marriage. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. Instead, she stood and walked past me to the balcony, her back to me. I can't do this, she said softly. Not here. Not now. I wanted to push her for more, to demand the answers I deserved, but something in her voice stopped me. The fight drained out of me, leaving behind only a hollow ache. I'm going for a walk, I muttered, grabbing my shoes. She didn't respond, and I didn't look back as I left the villa. The island's beauty was a cruel contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I wandered aimlessly, the sun beating down on my shoulders as I replayed every moment of the past few days. The way William looked at Lucy. The way she seemed to light up around him. Her hesitation when he made his disgusting proposal. It all pointed to something I didn't want to admit. Eventually, I found myself near the main house, where the group had gathered for brunch. I hesitated at the edge of the veranda, scanning the crowd for Lucy. She wasn't there, but William was, seated at the head of the table like a king holding court. He caught my eye and raised his glass in a mock salute. My fists clenched at my sides, but I forced myself to turn away. Confronting him here, in front of everyone, would only make things worse. Instead, I headed back to the villa, determined to confront Lucy again. This time, I wouldn't let her deflect or dodge my questions. When I arrived, the villa was empty. Her suitcase was still in the bedroom, and her phone was charging on the nightstand, but Lucy was nowhere to be found. I searched the surrounding area, calling her name, but there was no sign of her. Panic began to creep in as I imagined the worst. Then I heard laughter. Following the sound, I found myself near a secluded part of the beach. There, under the shade of a palm tree, was Lucy. She was sitting on a lounge chair, talking to William. They were alone, their heads close together as they spoke in hushed tones. My heart sank as I watched them, their body language telling me everything I needed to know. I didn't approach them. Instead, I turned and walked away, my mind racing. Confronting them now would only escalate the situation, and I needed time to think. But one thing was clear, this wasn't just in my head. Something was happening between them, and it was time to take control of the situation. Back at the villa, I started gathering my things. If Lucy wanted to stay and entertain William, so be it. But I wasn't going to sit around and watch my marriage crumble in front of me. As I packed, I noticed her phone buzzing on the nightstand. A message from an unknown number lit up the screen. Looking forward to tonight. Can't wait to see you. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. My hands shook as I set the phone down, my mind made up. I wasn't just going to leave, I was going to make sure she couldn't brush this under the rug when we got back home. By the time Lucy returned, the sun was starting to set. She looked surprised to find me sitting on the edge of the bed, her phone in my hand. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice calm but cold. "Just walking," she said, avoiding my gaze. "I needed some air." "With William?" I asked, holding up her phone. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw a flash of panic. "What are you doing with my phone?" "Answer the question," I demanded. "Were you with him?" She hesitated, and that was all the confirmation I needed. "It's not what you think, Mark," she said quickly. "We were just talking. That's all." "Talking," I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Is that what you call it now? Because this, I held up the message, looks a hell of a lot like more than just talking. Her face went pale as she read the text, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she sank onto the bed, burying her face in her hands. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered. Didn't mean for what to happen? I pressed. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been planning this for a while. It's not like that, she said, her voice breaking. I swear, Mark. It's not what you think. Then explain it to me, I said, my voice rising. Explain how the woman I married became the kind of person who sneaks around behind my back. She didn't answer. Instead, she sat there, tears streaming down her face, as I packed the last of my things. When I finally walked out of the villa, I didn't look back. The next few hours passed in a blur. I found a quiet spot on the beach and stayed there until long after the sun had set. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore was a strange comfort, drowning out the noise in my head. By the time I returned to the villa, Lucy was asleep, or pretending to be. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling as the reality of our crumbling marriage settled over me. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain, this trip had changed everything. And there was no going back. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Lucy moving around the villa. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the night before pressing down on my chest. The events of the past few days had built up into a crescendo, and I knew today would be the day everything came to a head. When I finally got up and walked into the living room, Lucy was standing by the window, staring out at the ocean. She turned when she heard me, her face drawn and pale. For the first time in years, she looked vulnerable. We need to talk, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, gesturing for her to sit. She remained standing, gripping the edge of the window frame as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. I made a mistake, she began. Her voice trembled, and she looked down at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. I let things with William get out of hand. The admission, though not entirely surprising, still hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there, waiting for her to continue, unsure of what to say. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she said, tears streaming down her face. I thought it was just harmless attention, flattery. But it became something I couldn't control. And last night? I asked, my voice colder than I intended. Was that just harmless too? She winced, her body trembling. No, she admitted. I didn't meet him last night, Mark. I was going to, but I couldn't. I knew it would destroy everything. Her words hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to believe her, to hold on to the hope that maybe there was still something worth salvaging. But deep down, I knew the damage was already done. I can't do this anymore, Lucy, I said finally. I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. Please, Mark, she begged. I'll do anything. I'll quit my job, cut off all contact with William, whatever it takes. Just don't give up on us. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to forgive her. But the betrayal was too deep, the pain too raw. I need time, I said. Time to figure out if there's even an us left to save. She nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Take all the time you need, she said. I'll wait. I'll fight for us. I left the villa shortly after, needing space to clear my head. The day passed in a haze as I wandered the island, trying to sort through my feelings. By the time I returned, the sun was beginning to set, casting the villa in shadows. The quiet was the first thing I noticed. No sounds of movement, no soft hum of Lucy's voice. I called her name, but there was no response. A chill ran down my spine as I made my way through the villa, checking each room. And then I found her. She was in the bathroom, slumped against the wall with an empty bottle of pills at her side. Her skin was pale, her breathing shallow. Panic surged through me as I dropped to my knees beside her, shaking her shoulders. "Lucy!" I shouted. "Wake up! Please, wake up!" Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, and she looked at me with a faint, sad smile. "I'm sorry, Mark," she whispered. I couldn't face losing you." "No," I choked out, grabbing my phone and dialing for help. My hands trembled as I gave the dispatcher our location, begging them to hurry. "You're not going anywhere, Lucy. Stay with me." The minutes stretched into eternity as I held her hand, whispering words of reassurance she probably couldn't even hear. By the time the medics arrived, her breathing had slowed to a faint, uneven rasp. They worked quickly, their voices calm but urgent as they tried to stabilize her. I stood back, helpless, my heart pounding as they carried her out on a stretcher. I followed them to the hospital, my mind a blur of guilt and fear. I had left her alone when she needed me most, too wrapped up in my own anger to see how much she was hurting. If I had stayed, if I had just listened, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Hours passed before a doctor finally emerged, his expression grave. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "We did everything we could, but the damage was too severe." The words hit me like a freight train, and I stumbled back, my legs giving out beneath me. The doctor placed a hand on my shoulder, but his touch felt distant, meaningless. Lucy was gone. I spent the rest of the night sitting by her bedside, holding her lifeless hand as the reality of what had happened slowly sank in. The woman I had loved, the woman who had betrayed me, was gone. And I would never have the chance to forgive her, or to tell her I still loved her despite everything. The island trip ended in tragedy, a paradise turned into a nightmare. As I left the hospital the next morning, the sun was rising over the ocean, its light casting a cruel irony over the scene. Life moved on, as it always did, but for me, the world would never be the same.